We're going to do another talk today with opening of the pubs hoving into view on Saturday on the 4th of July. I'm very pleased to be joined by Dave Mountford again, and also by Gary, who's the CEO of rradar, our legal partner. And the idea of today was really to ask a few questions around opening on Saturday and maybe some of the legal, possibly even a bit of the insurance angle on that. So if that's okay, we'll crack on from there. I suppose the first point I'd like to make is the trade's opening on Saturday. They had about 10 days since they received a set of guidelines from the government. And I just wondered, just quickly to maybe start us off, Dave, from an operator's point of view, Gary, obviously with his legal hat on, what we've kind of made of those guidelines. Do we think they're going to be helpful for the trade? Any thoughts to start us off? So maybe Dave first.
So from our perspective, the guidelines, obviously we only had them a few days now. They are understandably quite they're a catch-all. They cover an industry-wide sort of sector, the hospitality industry. So, you know, they're very, the word I'm trying to avoid using is vague. I can't help that. You could drive a bus through them, and they leave lots of interpretation, which is obviously a concern from us as operators. We know that the people who are going to be policing those guidelines have got probably the same concerns. So I suppose that leads me into a sort of a question, really, and that's that when you have guidelines like that, how, as an operator, do people protect themselves from those being interpreted in a slightly different way that we may interpret them as an operator? Is that something you could give us a little bit of guidance on, Gary?
Yes, and I think everybody has to accept the difficulty about how little notice has been able to be given. The government's got a tricky position without a shadow of a doubt. Whichever government was going to be in, this was not going to be an easy ride to try and work out how to safely set the economy back up and running again and interpret statistics and death rates and medical advice. The government keeps on saying it's following the science to try and do things safely. But I think everybody generally can recognise that each analytical report about the UK, we're the hardest hit out of the G7 countries. We've got big financial and economic problems. We've got the deepest recession in just a few short weeks that this country's ever experienced for a century. So in economic terms, now worse than the Great Depression when it hit the globe a century ago. So that balance between trying to allow mental health, well-being, that people have been locked up for an incredible length of time now, that it's incredibly difficult. Reports that I saw today about the forgotten, those that have got disabled families and children and things like that. The pressure's been quite incredible on individuals cooped up. So trying to get the guidance out, follow the science, get comfortable enough, worries about second spike. It just shows there are so many things at play. And then the government is trying to get health and safety guidance out and compliance guidance out to a whole industry sector, as you both said. Therein is the problem. There are so many different types of establishment, size, structure, group, corporately backed, etc., multi-site businesses, resources, ability to get good advice on the interpretation. What does your broker's risk management services and advice say? What do your insurers say? There's a lot of things for businesses now very quickly from having been locked away, cooped up, concerned, distracted by lots of issues where personal and professional lives have clashed in a way that's never ever happened before. Suddenly you've got to switch your business head back on and try and look your way through this guidance. It's not an easy task. A rule of general application is always expected that you interpret it and apply it with thought to the type of business structure that you are. Right. So the generic guidance is not fit for purpose without individuals and organisations trying to look at the size of their premise, the location of their premise, where their toilets are, do they serve food, what type of alcohol, what hours do they want to operate. You've got to apply it then to your particular circumstances. And there isn't a rule for doing that, because this is new guidance in a new world. And if there's one thing that I would say, palpably over the telephone advice lines, through email and our digital platform, we're giving advice to businesses up and down the country on these guidelines across industry sectors. And the biggest anxiety is confidence, people being able to interpret them in a way that they feel safe to open. And one of the big issues in confidence is talking to your own staff as well, because people have got worries about commuting, travelling. What are they opening themselves up to? Do they have to wear a face mask even before they get to the premises for work? And is it safe to be back in work? Because to interpret the guidance, to be up and running safely, you need full engagement from your staff. So you've got to get them confident, you've got to get them engaged, and then to carry out the risk assessment, to be looking at the safe systems. Where am I going to put signage up? What's the rules over food? What's the rules over spacing? How are you going to make that easy for a customer to interpret? And then let's face it, we're dealing with alcohol. So how do you enforce that over time when people have had the second drink, the third drink, the fourth drink, and there's a lot of emotions going to be bubbling out? You really do have to get the buy-in of your staff to try and start interpreting this right, and to be taking on the risk of opening up. And we're finding that, so not just over the pub trade, that's every industry sector at the moment. And so where we're finding that we are helping people is trying to ask them the right questions about the size of the premise, the location of the premise, etc., to start them down that road of being able to apply some more specific ways of interpreting the general guidance. Quite a long answer, and there's a lot in there, but that's what we're finding a lot of the time. Unpacking all of that in a phone call with a customer is what's happening when we're dealing with somebody to try and give them advice. All of that's in people's minds at the moment, which is making it a difficult and confusing time to try and look at how do I set the business up. And that's without even thinking about the cost of supplies, sanitation, the hygiene, the gels and the things that you put in place, and what's your expectation of how customers use them, etc. Do you put screens up? If you do put the screens up, how do you put the screens up? Where do you put them in? Get the tradesmen in, etc. How often do you clean the screen? Because once you put a screen in place, screens need hygiene and cleaning and etc. as well. It's a lot for businesses now, especially small businesses, to try and take on and consider applying in this short window of time, Dave, that you've rightly explained. It is a short window to try and get all of this through and done.
So you think that those mitigating factors are, things that people could take into consideration, broadly speaking, as if the individual operating the business can demonstrate that they've shown that they have tried to address those issues, that will obviously, you feel, provide an element of comfort in their protection once they've opened from perhaps overzealous local authorities, let's say.
Yeah, it's fair to say I think everybody that's trying to set their business back up will be expected to put some documentation, some evidence of thought process to the decisions that they've made.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean war and peace, and that doesn't mean writing long-winded documents. And actually what I find from having been an ex-prosecutor, defence lawyer and investigator for 30 years now, actually the more complicated you try and make systems and process, the more likely it is it's going to fail, and that your staff and your employees don't understand it, embrace it, follow it, etc., much less your customers. So keeping it simple is the best. But yeah, I mean, risk assessment, method statement, safe system of work, training, etc., induction. If you've got to take new employees on because you need different staff now for setting up, because the staff that you had through illness, through not wanting to come back, you might have to make changes. This is the whole reason the Health and Safety at Work Act is there, and that risk assessment process is to put reasonable and fair documentation in place, showing that you've applied fair and good judgment to what you've done in your business, and how you've interpreted risk, managing that risk, and communicating and training people to deal with it. So it is about documentation and a paper trail. but definitely not making it over complex, that you're doomed to failure. And I think if businesses are following that guidance and applying themselves fairly and properly there, so they're not ignoring risk and just not recording it and saying, oh, I didn't think that was a risk. Yeah. You've got to be fair and balanced and not choose to ignore things and then try and justify it later. So if the paper trail, the risk assessment is fair on that basis, and on the balance, I find that most businesses are pretty good at this, because we've had 50 years of the Health and Safety at Work Act now and risk assessment method statement and things around. So this is very well known now. I actually find that most businesses are pretty damn good. So if they apply themselves that way, I think the fair there, to your point, David, we would expect that the regulators are incredibly fair and tolerant and supportive of businesses as well, and so that they don't nitpick, they don't be overly zealous, etc. Yeah, if you're a bad actor and you're going about it in the wrong way, then you can expect the regulators to come down with the full force of the law on you. But I don't expect that, and I lobby and argue hard and defend the businesses that I work with, where that you look at it and you say, well, on balance, how much more could they be reasonably expected to have done? Yes. System and processes in place, signage is in place, labels are in place, staff have been trained, documentation exists. You don't expect those people to be hauled over the coals when they're working as hard as that is and evidencing it that way. They're trying to do the best they possibly can. As the science changes, we know that new diagnoses or new interpretation of loss of smell, etc., changed what people were supposed to be asking to look for in terms of a sign of COVID-19. We didn't know that. We went into it in March, and the guidance got updated. Yeah. So communicate these things to businesses. So don't try and think that with everything that's going on, what I said a few minutes ago, people are finding it really hard. They've got to pay the mortgage, they've got to look after the families, they've got to get the business up and running, and the government definitely knows that SME Britain is going to be what pulls this economy around and pulls us back through, and it is needed to support business. So I'd expect a supportive attitude from the regulators, not one to be trying to look to nitpick and prosecute people. That's not fair and that's not appropriate. And I would always argue and stand up for every business against that and defend them, and to the hill.
Right. Brilliant. That's a really interesting. I just wanted to jump in there because I think that's a key point for our members that are looking in. I mean, obviously people are scared about their license, both the personal license and the premises license, and getting it right. And if I read what you're saying right, is look, do the best job you possibly can. Don't ignore it. Make sure you've documented things. Make sure you've trained your staff. Make sure you've covered as many of the bases as you can. And we would hope in this situation that regulators, if there is an issue, rather than taking action against you or be saying, look, we can see you've done a good job here. There's a couple of things we'd like you to maybe change, adapt, do, and you adapt those and it involves. So it'd be very much a collaborative approach to this. And I think if I'm reading you right in saying that, that's going to be a great relief to an awful lot of people. That'll offer them a degree of reassurance in the way, as long as they've done the work first, looked at the risks and applied them to their establishment, trained their staff, done as much of the things right as they can, there shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, and let's be honest, these guys should be used to it because, as I say, risk assessment method statement, they've been running premises before. Yeah. So they've got to have system and process in place to have been doing it right before. To add to what you've just said, I try to make it really simple for people because, as I say, in courtrooms and police stations and investigating, prosecuting, defending as a litigator I've done for 3 decades now, where it falls down is overcomplicating things. Yeah. So don't think to set yourself back up, you have to rewrite your whole governance for your business. You don't. What you are looking at it is with that fair and reasonable eye, not turning a blind eye and ignoring what you know you shouldn't. It's looking at what you've got that should be fit for purpose and working anyway. That's why you've got it. And then for me, I just put it in the three biggest categories for people to switch on and think about, I think, is cleaning, clothing and separation. So what hygiene processes, yeah? What kind of sanitization do you need to have? Deep clean before you set back up, etc. How are you if you've had the premises vacant and nobody in there, or it's just, what kind of cleaning and things have been a bit? So look at the hygiene to set up in the first place, and you deep clean before you start dispensing liquids and foods and things to human beings again. Yeah. And again, food standards and these sorts of risk assessments, that's been there in the past. But you're looking at it now with the eye for COVID-19. So what cleaning to set back up are you putting in place, and what cleaning whilst you're running and operating and you're putting in place, and general and disinfectants and things like that. In terms of the clothing, then this is about your gloves, this is about your mask, this is about, what do people feel comfortable with, goggles and things like that. And in that, you've got to be fair and reasonable as well. And then the third is separation. So we've got the 1 metre, 2 metre thing, yeah, and we've got, to be fair, if you're doing the 2 metre, you're not going to be going too far wrong. If you're trying to reduce that, it starts to again get a little bit more tricky. And then when you throw alcohol in it, if you're trying to go for a short distance, this is where your problem is. So I would err on the side of caution on that one. But then it's your separation. So it says, well, what's the capacity then for my staff to work safely, to be in and behind the bars and carrying out jobs, etc. So what's my head count of staff? That also dictates partly about how many people you're going to invite in, and then you've got the square footage. So it's, for me, don't try and overcomplicate things for businesses. What you had before, if you were a chair manufacturer before and you're setting back up, you still are. So your governance that you had in place was thought fit for purpose before. So don't rewrite the whole bloody thing. But look now with those 3 themes in place, cleaning, clothing, separation, and insert them in the relevant parts of your governance, showing that you have properly applied and considered them in a fair judgment way. If you've got that, you're not rewriting the whole rule book. You're then not retraining your staff on a completely new business process. The ones that I'm seeing that are coming to us that think they've got to do that are interpreting it entirely wrong, and they're getting the wrong advice, in my view. Stop re-engineering your whole business. Does that make sense, Ian?
It makes sense to me, Dave. I think that's really useful.
Yeah, fantastic. Really, really good stuff. Can I just ask another question, Gary? And if you've got the time to give us your opinion on it, many of our members are tenants of businesses which have landlords, which, let's say, don't have the greatest history of being operating fair and lawful businesses, and they were regulated as a result of that. And there are a lot of people who are very concerned about the fact that the code of practice that the government brought in to deal with the very thorny issue of rent and debt that was probably accrued during shutdown should be shared between the 2 companies, the 2 businesses, i.e. the landlord and the tenant. What do you think it would be the any sort of protection measures for people who are making the decision that they are not going to open and feel that they're pressurised into opening? Do you think there is the same level of leniency and recognition from anybody attempting to perhaps go for forfeiture of a lease, for example, or something like that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot in that one, Dave. Quite a bit to unpack in there. Let's try and break it down a little bit. Okay, well, without trying to get too deep into it, again, I think if anybody was going to go to court and try to go for forfeiture, the courts are going to be somewhat lenient and be expecting some good corporate ethical behaviour from businesses, shall we say. No judge is immune from the COVID-19 and knowing and understanding the predicament and what's been happening. The business that feels it's been pressured, if it's got documentation, if it's got emails, if it's got things that have been sent to it, it's going to have a paper trail. It's going to have information that can support itself, that they're trying to be pressured or felt under duress to do something that they're not confident or perhaps even feel legal or insured and capable of doing. So the individual that's looking at open the business or not is making a judgment call. So they'll want some documentation in place that they're consulting and talking to their staff. So if they've got staff that have been ill, that are self-isolating, that have got carer duties, and let's face it, there's been a debacle over schools. It ended up being unions involved, politicians, etc. involved, and it's made a massive problem for every single one of us with a single issue that could help the back to work confidence in the home if we could sort out the issue about our children, say, can they get back to school on a proper organised basis, and you take that anxiety away from parents.
Yeah.
But if we're looking at that business that's feeling pressured, that business will be looking at, well, what's my judgment on why I don't think I can open? I've got emails and I've got records of telephone calls. I've made contemporaneous notes of those telephone calls. I've put a note in a diary on a piece of paper, etc. Who rang me and told me what the expectations are, and that if you don't open and you're still going to have to pay your rent, we might take action, etc. Record it, make notes of it, put it down, keep a trail of all of that, and wherever possible, engage in email and ask for reasons and justification for why they feel that they're being asked to do something. They'll then need to be able to take that, interpret it, and look at their staff, the pressure on the staff, the engagement of the staff. Have they got employees that they can bring back to work, will engage and allow the business to get back up and running? What's then the costs of getting back up and running? And what's the money that they've got to be able to afford to do this? So for it to be seen fair and reasonable for somebody to take forfeiture action, then they're going to need to come with clean hands, and that there isn't evidence of being pressured and put under duress, and that the business has been given fair opportunity and time and has documented how it's tried to consider, can it do it legally? Can it do it insured? Can it do with the right staff, etc.? So where are those thought processes and those steps in place? And again, don't overcomplicate. Just date, times, names and things in diary of who's spoken, and the gist of those conversations is really important to be made contemporaneously. But then I would also have thought the quid pro quo is most people will be thinking about, how can I open? I do want to get my business up and running. I do want to pay my bills as normal and run a business and try to get back to normality. So if somebody's saying they can, by applying themselves to the guidance and the rules, they're also showing and putting the documentation in place that they should be using with that landlord, with that business that they feel is putting them under pressure, and putting those points across that I haven't got staff that will help me to comply with this. I haven't got the supply chain availability to get the materials and the screens and the PPE, etc. in place that I need to do it on this date, etc. And document that and push that back to the person as well that they feel is putting them under duress and pressure. And you know, if it goes beyond that, then your organisation, they should be getting in touch with you, and then if they need to be in touch with a firm like ourselves for some advice on it, if they feel that, right, it's gone beyond the pressure and I'm now getting documents about legal action, then they should be quickly looking to people like yourself and signposting then for the proper support to be able to deal with people if it does look like a litigation process is going to be commenced.
Right, brilliant, thank you. That's great.
That's great. Well, we've kind of come to the end of our allotted time on that, but I think that's been really useful. I've been frantically making notes here. So, Gary, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. That's been really useful. Dave, thank you. And I'll catch up with you both soon. Thank you again. Cheers.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. All